Grazie mille, grazie di essere venuti, benvenuti alla Casa della Storia Europea. Mi chiamo Constanze Itzel, dunque sono tedesca, ma il mio italiano è troppo limitato per fare questa introduzione. Cos'è la lingua preferita? Inglese o francese, tedesco? Inglese o francese? L'inglese. Yes, okay, English. So English is the majority decision then, yes. Please come together so that you can hear me, because there might be other groups, or you can stay seated, of course. There might be other groups coming, because this is one of the rooms where the guided tours start. So welcome again. I will tell you a little bit about the history of this project. Why the House of European History, what is the mission, what is the idea behind, and how was it created? So the idea is already quite old. It was from 2007. The idea was to create one transnational history museum looking at the history of Europe from one transnational perspective as a complement to the national museums, to the regional and local museums. Also a museum about the history of European integration process, because as you know, this does not really exist, although there are small houses like the Schumann House or the Jean Monnet House, but there is no big museum telling the history of the European Union and its predecessors. So what we had to do here for the first time in history was to create one pan-European perspective on 19th and 20th century history. And this was very, very complicated. And as historians, you might imagine, of course, the difficulties of agreeing on a joint narrative. And I can speak a little bit about how we did this squaring the circle of unity and diversity, if I may say so. But it was also complicated for very practical reasons. You have to imagine that we had to bring here historians and museum experts from as many different countries as we could. So first of all, dispatching the vacancy notices, finding the colleagues, making up a team that comprises all expertise we need on historical periods, but also all nationalities that we could afford, where we had 10 historians, so we could not have one per member state. That's a frequent question that we are asked. Do you have one per member state? But that wouldn't, of course, be an answer, because one doesn't represent one view of a country, so that's already a political thinking that is wrong. So we created a team out of historians that came from East, West, North and Southern Europe. We tried to balance it as far as we could. And we did this teamwork of developing the permanent exhibition that you will see during 6.5 years, from 2011 to 2017. Another reason why it was so complicated was that we started without any object, as opposed to other museums that already have a rich collection. We started from a blank sheet of paper. So, and it's a narrative-based museum, as my colleague will show you. So it's, we first developed the messages, the narrative, the historical narrative, the messages we wanted the visitor to understand. And I hope he does, that we are testing this at the moment. And then from there we went into the creation of different spaces with designers, and into the choice and selection of objects, documents, films from across Europe. Now you might imagine how complicated that is, because not all museum databases are online. In many countries they are not online, they are not available, so we had to contact the colleagues in Bulgaria, Romania, or even go there to look at their storages and see what we could get from there. All in all, we ended up with a collection, an exhibition based on objects from 37 countries. It's changing all the time, but that was what we started with for the permanent and first temporary exhibition. Then also to have a balance in the objects. That's not always easy, because you can imagine you find some from certain countries, but then you get into a rush, you get some negative answers, and then it's easy to fill from the big collections, the German or Belgian big collections. In some cases we had to do that, but as the permanent exhibition keeps changing, we can replace objects over time, and we can even more diversify the representation of the collection. Very difficult, as you are historians of European integration, was to visualize in a museum the European integration process. Because as you might know, no museum is collecting at a large scale. Of course, there are the archives. We have national museums collecting often the accession of their country to the European Union, but not on a large scale. So there were no lenders. There were a lot of private collectors, but in many cases, it was abstract topics that we had to illustrate with films rather than, or with audio stations or debates in audio format rather than objects. So this was also a very complicated thing to do. Then the languages. The exhibition is in 24 languages. That was the political will of our sponsor, the European Parliament, because for the European Parliament, it's a democratic prerogative that citizens can use the texts in the official language of their country. Exhibition in 24 languages means you can't put the texts on the wall, so you will see an exhibition without any texts, and we have them in a tablet, which is a huge effort because any object change has to be, the text has to be translated into the 23 other languages, uploaded on a tablet, and that's one full-time position in my team only to take care of this tablet. And it's a challenge for the visitor, as you will see, because it's not a habit that you can't read on the wall. You will have to go through the tablet in Italian. You can find the texts and you can find the voiceovers for the films, and you can find audio stations on the tablet. It's of course a nice tool because we can add more languages if we want to, and we can add more content. It's a very flexible tool, but it's a challenge for the visitors also that we are still testing and that you will probably comment on as well. But also the languages in the team. As I said, we recruited historians from across Europe, and not everybody had often worked in English. As you might imagine, if you work for a national museum for 20 years, you might not have the chance to write a lot in English. So we had to put all those English written texts, we had to have them copywritten and then retranslate into the national languages. A huge exercise if you're aware of the different meaning of certain words or certain terms, like even First World War, the Great Patriotic War, La Grande Guerre. You see, so the translators that we used had to be aware of these nuances in different languages and not just translate word by word, but use the right terms. Also in the team, if you search for historical content or for objects, you often get to the limits of the languages that you master, although we do have 18 languages in the team, but still, for example, I had to search in a database about Poland, and even if you Google Translate the Polish terms, you might end up with wrong results, so we had to do teamwork to help each other out to get to this result that you see here. If we compare it with a history book, and we have done that twice with big history books that have recently been published, I think what we have to point out is that it's really a teamwork. It's not an assimilation of chapters written by every time by one person, but it's a teamwork to come to this, what you will see. And so it's a result of 6 years of discussions, of compromise, also sometimes painful compromises when it comes to space. As for example, about European integration, many of us would have liked to show more, but the space is very limited. And we had to make a museum for the whole of Europe. It's a museum of European history, not a museum of European Union history, which would be very, very different. We would have come to a very different number of square meters for the European integration process. So you will see a compromise that now we have opened since 10 years and which receives lots of comments. And if I may say, perhaps on the comments, it's very interesting to see that they are not one-sided. Sometimes they contradict each other, so it means we are somehow in the middle, which is good. But one of the most frequent type of comments is what is missing. And you can imagine that it's always a selection, it's always a choice, curatorial choice, which we, by the way, we try to stress when we speak about interpretation. At the beginning of the exhibition, we try to stress that this is an interpretation and it could be done differently. So the choice can be challenged, but the list of what, according to people's views is missing, is very long. They are all individual comments, so we don't have for the moment very strong tendency, but we are observing that, and it's very interesting to see that sometimes these comments come out of the fact that visitors are used to a national perspective. So when you know your own country's history, which is the case of some visitors, but most of them of course have little knowledge, but for those who expect certain events from their own national history, they are sometimes disappointed, and might happen to you as well, because it's a pan-European perspective, and it's so there were criteria applied, like to choose events that were born in Europe and spread over the whole continent, but that meant that some more national or bilateral topics were left out. And so it's one interpretation that you will discover. So a very long process. Even the job descriptions of curators are not the same across Europe. The expectations of visitors towards a history museum are not the same across Europe. The way of looking at history, be it critical, self-critical, or propagandistic, are very different, even in the museums across Europe. So we are a place for showing these differences and for stimulating debate. And I hope that's what you will contribute to. I hope that you will send us your comments and be as critical as you can and help us improving the exhibition. But first of all, I'm of course available to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you for listening.
Is the feedback collected by all the web visitors, or only locally here?
Yeah, so
mainly, or in which
yes, we have
percentage?
different sources. Of course, there is the feedback that comes out of people just leaving comments, like in the Golden Book and in the TripAdvisor, but that's not systematic. We have now created an evaluation policy, which is very ambitious, to test everything, exhibitions even before they are born, in the long run, to evaluate everything across the board. But for surveys about the exhibition, we have now created a survey which will be implemented in the tablet, so that at the end of the visit, but it's not online yet, you will not see it, but at the end of the visit, people can answer questions.
Some of us is thinking to make a project about the identity of Europe.
That's interesting, yeah.
So this could be maybe supporting in a way.
Yeah.
Well, let's see.
Yeah, we would also like to do interviews with the visitors. We have done some of them, but only 30 for the moment because we lack resources. But with the interviews, we would like to see what is the impact of the exhibition. What do they remember when they go out? Does it change their worldviews or not? Or does it just confirm prejudice? All this should be found out, so this is definitely interesting for us.
What about the temporary exhibitions?
Sorry, I forgot. Mea culpa. Yes, there is a space, 2 floors for temporary exhibitions. We change them once per year because we make the content ourselves, as it has to be transnational. We often get offers, but they are often from one national point of view, and then it's hard to say which one we take and which one we don't take. So we try to show European exhibitions. And now it's about restless youth, so Christine can explain better than me, because she was the main curator.
Ma poi vi faccio vedere
ok.
un testo ancora più bello.
Yeah, okay. Any other question?
Possiamo fare una domanda o due ravvicinata o va bene così? Allora fate una domanda, poi tutte e due. Here. There is Europe with the il toro, come si dice, the bull? No.
Yes, yes.
At the first floor.
Yes,
and
that's
then
true, yeah.
we go to the end of the 18th century.
Yes.
Why this
Yes.
jump from?
Yes, a good question. The decision was taken to concentrate on 20th century history. We more and more added elements from the 19th century, revolutions and industrialization, colonialism, etc. But the first floor is a kind of introduction to Europe itself. So it asks questions like, what is Europe, where does it end? Europe on the Bull is a series of interpretations of Europe from a political perspective. So how does the view on Europe change? And actually the message is that it changes with the century and it changes with the point of view of the beholder. So and it's a cultural construct.
Greek history. So
yes. So you're interested in
the lady on the bull.
He studied
yes.
Greek history. We have no Middle Ages scholar here because there are not a floor dedicated.
Yes.
So his name is Francesco. Me too. At San Francesco, he cries a bit because.
Yes. Yes.
Could you add something about the Middle Ages in the future?
Yeah, I think we should consider temporary exhibitions, and we will revise the permanent exhibition. But the space is limited, as you will see. You know it already. So it's always a choice that we have to make. I regret it myself, I have to say, but there are some objects from the Middle Ages, but not a huge.
The building.
We should build 10 times the size of the museum. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Another question? No. Other question? No. Umberto, please. No question. So, thank you very much. Now we can start.
Okay, thank you for coming and enjoy the visit. Bye.